benvenuti, grazie. Io ringrazio Biennale Tecnologia per l'invito. Questo è un incontro organizzato da Biennale Tecnologia in collaborazione in qualche maniera con l'USI, che è la rivista per cui lavoro, l'USI sulla cultura. E quando c'è stata diciamo, l'opportunità di collaborare, di pensare insieme a un intervento e a un talk per Biennale Tecnologia, io non ho avuto dubbi di provare, di chiedere appunto alla casa editrice di provare a coinvolgere Harry Parker, perché avevo già letto il suo primo libro che era stato pubblicato qualche anno fa in Italia, che si chiamava Anatomia di un soldato, ed era un romanzo inusuale in cui veniva raccontata la storia di un giovane capitano britannico in guerra in Afghanistan e anche la storia di due civili, storia però raccontata attraverso una quarantina di oggetti, dei più disparati, dalla bicicletta a un catetere, dalle spore dei funghi. E appunto era appena uscito in quei giorni questo nuovo libro invece, che Martina Testa, la traduttrice, mi diceva altrettanto bello, ed era così, ed è un libro che mi sembrava perfetto per Biennale Tecnologia, perché è un reportage narrativo, un saggio narrativo che affronta alcuni dei temi diciamo più importanti forse della contemporaneità. Parte dalla sua storia personale, perché Harry Parker ha perso entrambe le gambe in guerra durante 15 anni fa, e cammina appunto oggi grazie a delle protesi molto, molto evolute, e in questo libro parte dalla sua condizione, per allargare lo sguardo però e interrogarsi su appunto alcuni temi che hanno un valore generale e che sono appunto fondamentali per la contemporaneità, perché da qui, dalla sua storia personale, la ragiona sull'identità in generale, cosa vuol dire appunto esseri umani proprio, e in che maniera per lui invece queste protesi sono entrate a far parte della sua identità. Ragiona sulle potenzialità della tecnologia, è anche un libro di divulgazione, di storia della scienza. Lui visita musei, visita fiere di tecnologia avanzata. È un libro anche filosofico da un certo punto di vista, sui temi diciamo appunto più pungenti, più problematici che questo tipo di tecnologie, ma in generale tutte le tecnologie hanno nella società moderna, ed è in generale appunto una riflessione sul presente e sul futuro del rapporto tra esseri umani e macchine. Intanto vabbè, ti do benvenuto qui e partirei proprio da questo, dall'innesco, appunto dal termine umani ibridi, che non è solo il titolo appunto del libro, ma è una condizione. Tu da scrittore, con la sensibilità di scrittore, hai ragionato su tutti i termini che potevano definirti. Abilità, disabilità, sono tutti termini non neutri, su cui si è combattuto molto, anche battaglie politiche, no? E a seconda dei periodi storici sono stati termini carichi di stigma oppure di pregiudizio o meno, di rivendicazioni. E quindi erano termini comunque problematici in qualche maniera. Dall'altra parte, altri termini invece prestati dalla fantascienza, tipo cyborg, sono termini superomistici, anche no, troppo macisti e troppo dall'altra parte dello spettro troppo esagerati. E tu hai trovato questo Umani ibridi, che poi ha dato ha dato il nome al libro, che però tu dici appunto nel primo capitolo è proprio un termine che definisce la tua identità. Quindi ti chiederei di partire da qui.
Thanks, Matteo, and thanks for having me. And I'm sorry I'm not talking in Italian. Yeah, thank you. I mean, it's probably worth just showing you the tech we're talking about. So I've got single prosthetic on this side, and then an above-knee prosthetic on the right-hand side. And this is the one with most of the tech in it. You know, it's got the microprocessor and is an expensive bit of kit. And maybe we could talk a bit more about that in a bit. But the reason that I wrote this book, really, and I think it is a little bit to do with the story of what happened to me, you know, being a young, same age as many of you, and serving in the military. And then in an instant, you know, I stepped on a bomb and my life changed. And there were all the sort of technologies around survival of, you know, keeping me alive. in those first few minutes, and then the surgical recovery, and then getting prosthetics like these. But there was also a change to my identity. I went from someone who was very fit, very capable in a soldiering environment, to someone who was completely different and couldn't do that job anymore. And there were lots of emotions around that, embarrassment and shame and things like that, that we can talk about later maybe. But I think coming back to those terms like disability, and it just didn't feel like it fitted my experience to use those terms. And actually, in the book, there's a bit of a journey where I come at the end to accept things like disability as a legal term in the UK that gives me many rights and that people have fought for. But at the time, it felt like, I didn't really feel like a disabled person. I still felt like it was a little bit. I don't know, it sort of downplayed who I was. And then there was all the, as you said, the cyborg, the bionic person. Though they seemed to be too sort of aggressive and too science fiction, and also sort of lost the humanness. So hybrid humans was just a way of keeping the humanity in it, but trying to acknowledge that there was something going on at the boundary between the human and the technology that was interesting, and that's really what is threaded through the book.
Non so se vuoi a questo punto raccontare un po' meglio che cosa fanno e qual è la tecnologia dietro a queste protesi, perché appunto io leggendo il tuo libro mi sono stupito dal racconto che fai sia delle tue, sia appunto, poi questo lo vedremo più avanti, racconti molte fiere, e parli con molti scienziati e appunto racconti molte possibilità che ci sono oggi appunto per le disabilità o per l'ibridazione uomo-macchina. Però partiamo ovviamente dal tuo caso, perché anche una cosa per un ignorante come me, insomma, così apparentemente, cioè complessa ma elementare anche come una protesi come le tue, invece ha dietro ormai una tecnologia molto, molto, molto vasta, molto complessa anche.
Yeah, so it just cut out the translation, but I think what's interesting about these technologies is that even the first technologies I was given were mechanical knees, so they didn't have any microprocessor or any clever control or algorithms that were controlling the knee. And I learned to walk on those, and in a sense there was real benefit to learning on technologies that weren't so sophisticated, because they, in a way, they made my muscles stronger and musculoskeletally. It was good for me, but actually, in terms of mobility around the real world, they were really suboptimal. But when I was given a microprocessor knee like this, it really did change the way I could interact in the world, and I could start to forget that I had prosthetics on. And really, it's like we can get into the way that these companies manufacture this sort of technology, but this is made by an Austrian-German company called Ottobock. It costs about £60,000, probably similar in euros, and so as much as a family car, and it has many of the similar sort of things that you might read about a car. The way that it has different gyroscopes and sensors that allow me to step. It means that I can walk very smoothly, I can change speed, and when I stop, although that seems very simple what's going on there, it's allowing me to stop smoothly. If I was wearing a mechanical knee and I tried to do that, I'd just end up in a heap. And so I have this very expensive, really amazing bit of kit, but actually joining it to the body is still this sorry. The table moved, sorry. Hang on. So yeah, the socket, which is this carbon fiber bit and is made for me in a prosthetics center, has that technology, although the material science has changed, that material and the way of doing it hasn't really changed for over 50 years. And the site of sort of friction and the pain of being, if you like, integrated with technology is something that I feel every day in different ways. At the moment, it's very hot, it's sweaty. When it's cold, they can feel very cold. I get open sores and wounds. And I think in a lot of narratives around this sort of technology, you don't see that. You don't see the pain. You don't see the friction of what it actually means to join technologies to the body. And although this is a really sort of blatant example of it, we still hide it. You know, I hide it. I don't talk about it very much unless I'm talking to an audience like this. And I think we're all aware of the way that technologies have positives and negatives. And I think across medical technologies, you know, you think about brain implants, they are life-changing, but there's always that cost that's going on as well. And that's something that I really wanted to think about in the book.
In effetti questa è una delle cose che fai meglio, secondo me, nel libro, cioè raccontare la tua integrazione con la macchina, non in termini di tecno-ottimismo, ma in termini molto realisti, appunto, e illumini, diciamo, anche tutto l'apparato che c'è dietro. Non so se... No. Ok. Ok. Sì, non ho detto nulla, tanto tranquillo. Nel libro tu illumini molto bene tutto l'apparato che c'è dietro le tecnologie, quindi nel bene e nel male, appunto, non sei per forza ideologicamente tecno-ottimista, diciamo. E quindi anche l'apparato sanitario, che è molto grosso, il lavoro collettivo di tutti questi scienziati, appunto, non è un manufatto tecnologico, non so, subspecie eternitatis. Tu racconti proprio come vengono costruito, tutti i problemi che portano, anche le lungaggini, anche le cose nascoste a cui uno magari non può non pensare, i dolori che comunque ci sono dietro, sono tecnologie che risolvono o aiutano moltissimo, però che portano anche a nuovi disagi. Fra tutte queste cose, che poi adesso appunto cercheremo anche un po' di raccontare un po' meglio, che però hai scoperto su di te, ma anche appunto parlando con gli scienziati su altro tipo di dispositivi medici, per altri tipi di disabilità, qual è la cosa più sorprendente? Può riguardare anche appunto l'organizzazione collettiva scientifica che hai scoperto dietro a queste protesi, a questi tipi di tecnologie, ma che non ti saresti mai aspettato, appunto.
Yeah, just going back to just talking about being that sort of human in amongst this big world of medical technologies. It really reminded me of being a soldier and being within a system of systems, if you like. You're one tiny cog amongst all, you know, in a battlefield, there's other soldiers, there's tanks, there's planes. You're in this big sort of system, and you're communicating with technologies, and you feel very much part of it. And I've felt much more recently, and I don't really talk about this much in the book, but that weirdly, as a disabled person reliant on these very high-tech systems, that again, you feel like you're in this system of systems, and when one part of it breaks down, like you don't get an appointment, or the therapist who's meant to be giving you some physio is not available, you're that sort of point of friction, and that it can be painful and hard as the individual in that system. And I think one way of sort of illustrating that, and maybe this will speak a little bit to the end of your question, is that there was a device which was a bionic eye that I was reading about when I was researching the book. And it's not a sort of bionic eye like Terminator with a little red dot. It's a pair of glasses that you put on with a camera. But it does have an electrode which is placed on the cortex of the brain. So it is a device that it goes inside the body, but most of it is on this pair of glasses, it's called. And it was really amazing to read about this, but you sort of read further, and most of the people who are using it are only really seeing a few little dots in the darkness, if you like, and they use it as an aid for navigation, but it's not recovering their sight, if you like. And I was reading more recently that the company that makes that device was going into administration, it was going bust. And so those people, and you know, it's not huge amounts of people, but those people who had paid about £100,000, €100,000, let's say, to have this technology, that company had now gone bust, and they weren't, they were saying that they were going to be able to maintain it and give them the care, but I think the sort of anxiety and the anxiety as the user of the technology when you're dependent on all these institutions, health services, people, really, you can really feel it as a person. And when my leg fails, I become more disabled. If we're all on a spectrum of disability to ability, and everyone in this room will be somewhere along it, and it's to do with luck of genetics. You might acquire a disability in an accident like I did. It might just be aging, but I move very quickly up and down the spectrum of ability.
Questo però appunto apre secondo me una riflessione più ampia, appunto, aspetto che accendi, ok, eccolo, e sulla dipendenza che può creare la tecnologia, perché vabbè, in questi casi qui è evidente. La vita delle persone, la qualità della vita delle persone quantomeno dipende da queste tecnologie, che vuol dire che però appunto dipende da queste aziende, che vuol dire che dipende dal mercato anche fondamentalmente, e appunto l'impatto anche solo di un aggiornamento software, come nel caso che stavi raccontando, può avere un impatto, e non diciamo appunto per non immaginare neanche la dismissione di un software oppure di un hardware, può avere delle conseguenze traumatiche, completamente traumatiche. È però in piccolo, cioè anzi è in grande quello che succede già a tutti noi, nel senso che questa è una delle riflessioni che fai nel libro. In effetti siamo già più o meno tutti ibridi in una certa maniera, per gli smartphone, per tutta la tecnologia ormai invasiva e quotidiana da cui siamo dipendenti e che è un'estensione del nostro mondo. Quindi sì, forse questa è la domanda, se secondo te è così, siamo già tutti ibridi, e da questa posizione in qualche maniera, da questo punto di vista, in questo senso privilegiata, che cosa hai potuto capire di questo, della dipendenza, del rapporto tra esseri umani e tecnologia, quindi non solo dell'ausilio ma proprio della dipendenza, pericoli di questa dipendenza.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a particularly groundbreaking thing to say that we're all hybrid. I mean, as soon as anyone takes a paracetamol or a pill in the morning, they are, in a sense, ingesting a technology. And so you could say that anyone who's taken any sort of pill this morning is hybrid in some way. I think, the moment we take our phones out of our pocket and we start scrolling, and there's this architecture of software that feels, well, to me anyway, it feels like it feels very spatial, and it feels like I'm moving around it, and I'm also very dependent on it. It's something that I don't have a huge amount of control over. So I think those sorts of hybridity are already happening. There was I think just going back to what you were saying in your question, quite early on I was given a new software update to my knee, this microprocessor knee, and the piece of software was a new algorithm that was meant to make the knee even more intuitive. It was meant to allow it to step over things and step down stairs in a way that was meant to be more human. But I hated it because it almost took too much control away from me. And I think that's a sort of lesson, I think, for a lot of technologies, that as soon as you start to take too much control away from the human user, that lack of control can come, and not in everything, but I think it comes with real downsides. And I think when you think about things like AI, for instance, I think as soon as the human isn't the highest control entity, we start to get into problems. And so certainly in my own little way, being dependent on this knee, that's what happened when it was made too clever, if you like, and it felt very uncomfortable for me. And And I think there's another lesson in there, is that the guys from Autobot who were developing the software were doing it because they could, because it felt like the right thing to do. And it was only when they gave that technology to a user that they started to realize that it wasn't quite right. And I was part of that process of them, you know, in a way I was trialing it for them. But I think when we're developing technologies, the way that scientists, practitioners, engineers develop things has to have the end user sort of completely wrapped up in the process of development. I'm sort of not answering your question anymore, am I? I can't. Sorry.
No, non solo rispondeva, ma aggiungo una... Cioè mi aggancio a quello che stavi dicendo. Riesci a sentirmi? Sì. Are you listening? Ok. Perché appunto una delle cose a cui io non avevo mai pensato prima di leggere questo libro era anche come questo tipo di tecnologie riflettano poi una questione di cui si parla molto per tutte le tecnologie invece, e che è la questione del controllo dei dati. Perché in effetti anche le tue protesi raccolgono dati. E quindi questo apre tutta una serie di questioni legali, anche sull'appartenenza, che poi tu rifletti nel libro, giustamente da scrittore, sull'identità in generale. Però appunto no, questo tipo di protesi a chi appartengono i dati di questo tipo di protesi. Appunto, se c'è qualcuno che può leggere i dati che servono in teoria appunto per migliorare il funzionamento delle tue protesi, però appunto se qualcuno leggesse da quei dati che non stai camminando abbastanza, potrebbe magari togliertela a quel punto, no? Se è il Servizio Sanitario Nazionale o se è un'assicurazione, no? Ci sono molti di questi questioni legali ed identità, e ancora una volta appunto tecnologiche che si incrociano in questo.
Yeah, it's really interesting. There was a elderly woman came and chatted to me at an event, and she said that her husband had been in the military and had died, and he had been an amputee. And the UK National Health Service had got in touch with her, a month or so after he had died, and said, "Can we need the prosthetics back?" And she said, "Well, you can have them back, but they're 6 feet under, buried with him." So they couldn't have them back. But I think there is something strange there that I don't really know who owns this device. Every so often it gets given back to my prosthetist, and they give me a loaner knee. And I'm very lucky, very fortunate that because I was injured in active service, the limbs are given to me. But you said what the worry is, I suppose, that this limb there's an app I can open up, and the app's really clever. It can allow me to put it in golf mode and ice skating mode and like cycling mode and all these other modes that I never use. But it also keeps a log of how many steps I take each day. And there is a possibility that data, which I can't really see properly, but when I give it back to Autobot, they could say, well, this patient, this is an expensive limb. He's only walking, 2,000 steps a day. It's not really the best use case. There is a world in which, this limb might be taken off me for those reasons. And I think that is slightly unsettling. And I think the sort of, GDPR and all those sorts of bits of policy, I think where technologies start to become part of our bodies and start to give data about us in the healthcare setting, that there are some really worrying aspects of that in terms of privacy laws and the way in which we as entities are protected.
Appunto è già uscito fuori in quello che raccontavi, ma un'altra questione non aggirabile è quella delle sperequazioni, delle diseguaglianze, appunto, che creano per forza di cose queste tecnologie. Appunto tu hai potuto avere accesso, forse sin dal primo istante dopo l'incidente a un apparato medico di altissimo livello, grazie per il fatto che eri appunto un soldato, probabilmente in città, ma lo dice anche nel libro, saresti cavata paradossalmente peggio a quel punto, e invece in Afghanistan, sul campo di battaglia, hai avuto questa opportunità, se possiamo chiamarla così. E poi è andato avanti ovviamente e racconti, appunto hai detto che queste protesi costano più o meno come una macchina anche abbastanza di lusso. Nelle fiere che però tu visiti per il libro, mi sembra che raccogli tutto sommato come posso dire, una propensione, una postura, un'attenzione forse nuova per questo tipo di problemi che forse prima non c'era. Quindi la domanda è questa: questo tipo di tecnologie, come alla fine ogni tecnologia, aumenta le diseguaglianze, essendo una sovrastruttura del modello economico probabilmente, che da noi è il capitalismo, probabilmente appunto non fa altro che aumentare quel tipo di disuguaglianze che il capitalismo forse a volte inevitabilmente porta. E nel mondo tecnologico c'è sempre stato una sorta di tecno-ottimismo in cui si pensava invece alla tecnologia come completamente avulsa dalle questioni economiche, sociali, eccetera. Tu che adesso hai visitato anche appunto e sei diventato un esperto nel settore, credi che stia cambiando questo? Cioè, c'è almeno una nuova consapevolezza del fatto che la tecnologia appunto non può essere più trattata come una cosa a sé stante, come una matematica, no? Pura, ma una questione che riguarda la società, riguarda l'economia, come dicevi, appunto, riguarda le diseguaglianze economiche anche.
Yeah, the conference or essentially the symposium or trade show, if you like, that I went to was a really big one in central Germany that's every 2 years, where they have on display all the latest rehab equipment, medical rehab equipment that you could possibly think of, from the latest hearing aids to prosthetics to mobility vehicles, the latest gyroscopically stabilized wheelchairs, massive motorhomes for people with disabilities. And I think walking around it as somebody with a disability, looking at all the different bits of equipment and all the sort of marketing slogans like, life with limitless freedom, or, move how you used to, and things like that, which I know, even as I've got one of the best technologies, is not true. That's not a true marketing statement. But I think, so you feel like you're very much in this capitalist environment where there's those people who have these very large insurance payouts, or they're lucky like me that they stood on a bomb and their governments are going to help them. But that actually there are people who are never going to be able to access the latest or best technologies, or they're going to have to make huge sacrifices in order to do it. So I think that's something that I became very aware of, and I think in a more stark way. I was in my limb fitting center, so the prosthetics center, and a girl was sitting next to me who'd had meningitis and lost 3 of her limbs, and the technologies that she could get off our National Health Service were not as good as mine, and I was sitting there getting, the best kit you can, and I was sort of thinking to myself, well, it was bad luck for her as well. Why am I any more? Do I deserve this technology any more than she does? And I think then when you sort of fast forward that into what might happen. That's, Elon Musk's Neuralink, and if the sorts of things that he says are on the horizon somewhere, and those people who can afford to have, buy their children a Neuralink so that they're, more capable at school and maybe even happier, and, that sort of inequality, I think, really is unsettling, and I think there needs to be far more legislation around it. But again, as it's a capitalist environment, and there's just inherent unfairness within it. And even within our National Health Service, where in the UK, which is meant to be this very, equal environment, It's just not like that.
Allora, intanto io vi ricordo che il libro di Harry lo trovate anche lassù, non so se è qui, cioè fuori dalla stanza, credo, dall'aula. E vorrei, se avete domande, iniziate a pensarci, perché vorrei lasciare spazio negli ultimi almeno 10 minuti, un quarto d'ora alle domande. Però, invece, tornando al libro, ho ancora qualche domanda per te, perché per promuovere questo incontro ti abbiamo chiesto, con l'USI, la rivista per cui lavoro, di scegliere tre libri che in qualche maniera dialogassero con il tuo. E tu hai scelto, aspetta che devo prendere il post, James Bridle, Modi di essere, adesso ci arriviamo, Marco Connell, Essere una macchina, e Maggie Nelson, Gli Argonauti, che sono tre libri che vi consiglio anch'io, che dialogano molto con il tuo, in effetti. Sono tutti e tre libri ibridi, anche loro, come scrittura e come approccio. Nel senso che Bridle è un artista che scrive di filosofia, banalizzando, Marco Connell è uno scrittore che fa reportage giornalistici, e Maggie Nelson anche ha una scrittura tra fiction e non fiction. Tu ti senti come scrittore? Questa è una domanda proprio per lo scrittore. Ti senti appartenere a questo filone? Ti senti essere, perché anche il tuo primo libro, lo dicevamo, era un romanzo, sì, però era un romanzo attraverso gli oggetti, era un romanzo atipico, era un libro tipico. Come questo è un libro che mescola un reportage, mescola questioni biografiche, ovviamente, la tua storia, il tuo racconto, ma anche riflessioni filosofiche, e poi anche storia, appunto, divulgazione, forse anche, direi, e storia della scienza. E quando hai scelto questi tre libri, appunto, li hai scelti perché ti sentivi parte di una corrente, in qualche maniera?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I don't know how to place myself. I think every time I sit down and write, I really feel like a fraud more than anything else. But I think there is something interesting in the way that those books are, as you say, people who are moving. They're sort of not neatly categorized, and I suppose maybe I fit in that as well. And I think moving from fiction, although it was autobiographical fiction, to non-fiction, was interesting because, you know, when you move into something like science writing, I mean, I'm not a scientist, I'm not a journalist, I'm not a historian, but I was trying to sort of gather information around my experiences and meet people in a sort of journalistic way and find facts in a sort of way a historian would, and then go and research something. And one of the things that I found really interesting was reading academic papers that I just didn't understand a word of. You know, even the title of these things was too complex, especially when it was talking about AI or you know, control algorithms. I mean, I just had no way of accessing the language, and it took me, you know, I'd reread a paper 3 or 4 times and still not really understand it. And I think, so that was one thing I found interesting. And you in a way, you eventually do start to understand what's going on. And I think the other thing that was interesting is that no matter who I spoke to in a lot of these fields, is you'd sit down, you'd start talking, and within 10 minutes, I'd have asked a question, and they were saying, oh, no one's really sure. And it could have been on anything. It could have been about the way bones grow, or about AI, or about control algorithms in robots. And it was always that, I think from the outside, you feel like there's a lot more certainty in these fields if you're not an expert. And then you get into them, and everyone's still quite messy. You know, it's still a messy world, and it's complicated, and things aren't definite. And I think one thing I love about what actually Maggie Nelson writes in Argonauts is that as she's writing, she's really not certain of anything, but through the editing process, things get more certain because it needs to sound better. And your editor says, well, you can't say this is just sort of bollocks if you're going to say 2 things at once. And so I think that happens across everything, really, doesn't it? We strip out the uncertainty so that we get clicks and we get noticed. And I think being a writer and trying to give a sense of that uncertainty and that the world is messy is sort of, yeah, important to me.
Invece appunto il libro di O'Connell, che fra questi tre che citi, forse è simile al tuo in certi versi, è un reportage uscito in Italia per Adelphi sul mondo del transumanesimo, ed è in realtà molto ironico e insomma prende in giro abbastanza il transumanesimo e questa corrente filosofica, forse anche politica in parte, molto variegata. Diciamo la parte più nobile prevede che ci possa essere prima o poi un trasferimento completo dall'uomo alla macchina, non solo dal punto di vista dell'hardware ma anche del software, quindi può portare la coscienza e i pensieri, no, appunto in un algoritmo, e siamo ancora incredibilmente distanti dall'obiettivo. E ci sono anche, appunto, fanno parte della galassia transumanista, però anche quelli che sperano di combattere la morte e nel frattempo però si fanno congelare o si fanno tagliare la testa e se la fanno congelare, con operazioni che probabilmente sono poco più di una truffa, che però costano a loro milioni di euro. Tu mi sembri, tu sei meno crudele, diciamo, parli anche tu, insomma, in chiusura, mi sembra, del mondo transumanista. Che idea ti sei fatto di quella galassia lì?
Yeah, so when I was researching the book, I went and found this 80-year-old professor in a small town in England who had he was sort of the first cyborg in the 90s. He implanted RFID chips into himself and could sort of control things around Warwick University. And he's called Kevin Warwick, and he was really great and a nice guy to meet, but he had this idea of transhumanism, sort of transcending the sort of fleshy wetware that to him glitches and falls apart and we all get old, and that if he could upload himself into a computer, he would, and live forever. And I think, chatting to him, it just sounds horrendous to me. And I think one of the reasons it sounded horrendous was that I'd been a broken body, right, in a hospital, plumbed into machines and pipes and been sort of separated from my body. And I'm sure many people in this audience have had similar experiences where they suddenly, their body no longer works, and at the point of it failing, right? And I think just listening to him made me very fearful of actually getting rid of the soft fleshy bit, and how important that is. And I talk a lot about sort of embodied cognition and how we embody our bodies, and how important that is, I think, to being in the world. And I just think the other thing about transhumanism that felt slightly scary was this idea that it could, it would be able to solve aging and disability and all the other things that it thinks it can do when when the singularity happens and we can solve all the world's problems. But I just felt that there was too many sort of resonances with all those horrible things where we've tried to get rid of things from society or people or disability, and what's that done for us in the past. So I always look at the transhumanism, and some of them are slightly laughable, but I do think there's something about the project which is frightening.
Invece il libro di Bridle, appunto James Bridle, è un artista e filosofo che scrive libri di teoria. Ci collega però anche un'altra parte del tuo mondo. Appunto, tu sei andato a una scuola d'arte prima di diventare militare, e poi sei tornato all'arte fondamentalmente. E nel mondo dell'arte le questioni dei corpi, delle ibridazioni, dell'interfaccia, no? Sono tutti temi molto ricorrenti, affrontati, e questa è la domanda: in che modo? Cioè, avere tutta questa nuova consapevolezza, questo nuovo sapere anche tecnico, come ti ha fatto leggere, non so, il modo in cui il mondo dell'arte si approccia alle questioni dei corpi e delle tecnologie? A me viene in mente Sterlach, che è uno Stellark, scusami, uno degli artisti ormai insomma sì, forse le prime cose negli anni 80, no? Che ha spinto di più con l'integrazione uomo-macchina, però in maniera totalmente accessoria, diciamo. Era una dichiarazione filosofica, lui diceva che appunto l'essere umano, il corpo umano è superato e che è obsoleto e va adesso per forza integrato con la macchina, col computer. E all'epoca appunto anche cose molto minimali. Si fece installare anche una telecamera, tra le varie cose una telecamera sul cranio che gli pendeva così come una lucetta da notte, credo anche forse un microfono, un nuovo orecchio sul braccio. Ecco, che effetto ti fa? Non per forza lui, però vedere a questo tipo di arte adesso, dopo l'incidente ovviamente, e dopo tutte le cose che hai imparato e che sai.
I think those artists that are shining the light on those sorts of things, it's really important. And actually, before I was injured, I remember studying these guys who were, thinking about cyborgs and the body, and actually how we can break down those structures in society that have kept us all separate. And I think there's something about things like Donna Haraway's Cyborg Manifesto that are really, which I look at a little bit in the book, which are really liberating, right? They allow us systems and ways of collaborating together and breaking down societal barriers that is really exciting, I think. And I think, although my experience is very much as someone, it's very medicalized, isn't it? It's allowing me to move. I think my injuries has, if it had done anything to me, I'd probably still be a soldier in the British Army, doing that. And actually, by being injured, and being now dependent on these technologies, I think it's given me such a different worldview on and empathy for other people who, for whatever reason, don't fit within society in the way that they might. Yeah.
Sì, scusate, sono andato un po' più lungo di quello che pensavo, quindi abbiamo ancora 10 minuti, un quarto d'ora. E se ci sono domande io vi incoraggerei a farle. Lo porto io? Vai.
Hello. How and when do you think that technology will be able to extend human lives beyond the classic limits, which is set around 100 years?
I think, I mean, I'm not an expert on that sort of things, but I think, we're already extending it now, and there's some of the sort of DIY genetic people that sort of in the biohacking sphere are already trying to look at ways to extend the body. I think, I don't have I think gazing into the looking glass is so difficult for a lot of these technologies, and I think again it just talks to this idea of inequality, where there may be some areas of society where there'll be a technology that allows us to push out beyond 100, but then there'll be a whole raft of people who, because they can't afford it, can't then extend their lives. So I think for me, what's more interesting is who gets to extend their lives for longer, not when and how it happens. And I think that's what we need to be more sort of wary of, is the inequalities of things like that. I mean, how long do we want to live for anyway? I mean, it's just like, yeah. Any others?
Lì, ragazzo, aspetta, arriva il microfono.
Do you think people would be more optimistic about this technology if it was provided by the public healthcare system instead of private companies?
Yeah, as soon as you asked that question, it makes me feel like I've been too pessimistic during this talk. Actually, the book I think is more hopeful, and I am more hopeful. It's just that when we...
That's my fault. So.
No, it's just when we start to talk about these things, we often descend to the thing that's not right. But I don't think there's any time ever. This is the best time ever to be disabled or have a disability in any way, I think. And I'm lucky that I even can access these technologies. And okay, there's a system of institutions and people that I'm reliant on, and that can feel feel difficult, but at the same time, I'm glad it's there. And without it, you know, we'd be back 20, 25 years, and I'd be back on a mechanical knee, and it would be much more difficult. So I think I am more optimistic than maybe I've sounded during this talk about it, and I think we should be hopeful. And I think you're right. You know, if we could create a sort of an equality, it would be much easier. Yeah.
Due di là.
Hi, is something changed since you put this prosthesis, and now is something of different? You feel different. Sometimes you forgot that your legs are artificial.
Do you mean that? Do I forget that they're technology in my day to day? Yeah.
How you feel your legs?
Yeah, it's been.
You recognize.
Yeah, I mean, I can go for days with. Yeah, I can sort of. It's interesting that they slip in and out of my consciousness in terms of when they're not working, if there's a problem with them, or they hurt, or something's opened up and I'm bleeding, then I'm very aware of them as technologies. I'm very aware of the interface. But when life's good and they're going well and I've got no problems, they can almost disappear from sort of my consciousness. And it's really interesting that I now have a sort of day job where it's not about technology. I work in a university, and the people that know me, the disability, the technology, I think just disappears, and I just become Harry again. And it's only when you're moving about the world or interacting with people who you don't know necessarily, who they can make you more aware of it by asking you questions and stuff.
And yes, now we are really used to see a lot of kids with big disability on our Instagram profile after the 6th of October, during the war in Gaza, and actually how you see the aspect of the war also that is actually the cause that now you have this big disability, and I mean how you can represent the war now after your incident and what you're thought about it.
Do you mean in terms of the disabilities that people are gaining in the conflict? Yeah. I mean, the scale of it and it's frightening, really. And I think also in Ukraine, sorry, I'm so sorry. I can't concentrate while you're talking over there. Sorry, it's really hard. So I think one of the things that's so important is that initial care, where those technologies of survival can get to the injured person very quickly, and that's whether you get injured and knocked over here in a street or you're in a conflict zone. So I think in both conflicts, not being able to get to the people who are injured quickly means that they'll have disabilities that might be much longer lasting. Because if you can get to the person and start rehab quickly, then you're more likely to save them. So I think that's the thing that really worries me, is this idea that you can't. Yeah.
Ci sono altre domande? Pure in italiano potete farle. Avrete notato che eccola, in italiano no. Ti ho visto, ormai hai alzata la mano, non puoi nasconderlo. No, stai facendo vaga. C'è una ragazza, vabbè. Si gira. No, ci sono altre domande? Eccolo.
What do you think about providing highly developed knowledges to people who are in soldiers or, for example, children? Do you think it's something that is available for them, or something that can be more available in the future?
Yeah. Do you mean in terms of enhancing the soldier on the battlefield? Is that what you mean?
For example, providing highly developed knowledges. Thank you. Against for disabled people who maybe haven't been in the military and might have more difficulties being provided such technologies?
I think I mean, often conflict creates really quick advances. You know, we saw it in the Second World War. We've seen it in Afghanistan, where, for instance, this leg that I've got, there was like a grant from the US government for 21 million that was given to the Otto Bock in order to enhance it, and then that technology filters into the NHS. So I think, you know, those technologies should be given, should be given as widely as possible. Definitely, I think that's you know, crucial. I thought you were going to ask whether the technologies on the battlefield and enhancing the soldier, you know, is something that I think is good. I think it's probably inevitable. I think we're a long way from it being well, not a long way, but a fair way from it being sort of, you know, the sort of mech suits that you see in science fiction. But that might be a possibility.
Thank you. It was really interesting. I was wondering, since your incident, did you ever regret joining the army, and did your worldview change regarding war and the army itself? And yeah, thank you.
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't really regret it like that. I sort of knew the risks when I signed up, but I didn't sign up for any political reason or for any particular war. My family had been in the military for hundreds of years, and it was just something that I was, you know, I thought I'd go and give it a go at. I didn't join because of Iraq or Afghanistan. And I always felt when I was in the military and I look around at other people, and those people who were sort of really up for the fight, I'd always be a bit suspicious of, because I think the best soldiers are soldiers who are anti-war. And so I still feel the same, you know, I am anti-war. I think it's just you know, we could have a whole nother lecture on whether going to Afghanistan and Iraq was the right thing and what it was like to be a little tiny cog in that machine where you've been sent by politicians who've been elected in. And yeah, that was uncomfortable at times, especially if a soldier was killed and, you know, you'd then be asking yourself, why are we here? But I think it probably has changed my view, but a little bit. But essentially, I don't really regret it.
Ci stava, vai, un applauso. No, con questo, tra l'altro, vi saluto e appunto ringrazio Harry. Vi ricordo che il libro potete trovare lì sopra. È un libro appunto pieno, come avete capito, pieno di cose e scritto, aggiungo, appunto divinamente bene. Va bene, grazie a voi, grazie Harry. Grazie mille.
Thanks everyone, have good days. Cheers.